Welcome to the legendary Lake Titicaca. My name is Gordon and I convene the world's largest online magical training community at runesoup.com. And later in the year, we're going to be doing a 4 or 5 month course on the blending together of different astrologies and prophecy and forecast models around the world into one thing that makes them useful. And here on my last morning on the Peruvian side of Lake Titicaca, I wanted to have a discussion about the Inca understanding of time and energy. History has a problem when it comes to investigating things like the Inca mastery of time and energy, and that's that it can only find things that it believes already exists. It can't actually learn anything new, which means when you encounter the hyperdimensional reality of the Roca Sagrada and the origin point of Manco Capac and Mama Ocolo, the husband, wife, brother, sister, culture founders of the Inca civilization, they miss what I think is going on, what I feel is going on. So let me just read an example of that from BolivianLife.com, and we'll unpack it afterwards. According to Incan lore, Isla del Sol is both the birthplace of their revered sun god and the world's first 2 Incas. Story has it that following a great flood, the province of Lake Titicaca was plunged into a long period of darkness. After many days, the bearded god Viracocha arose from the depths of Lake Titicaca, traveling to Isla del Sol, where he not only commanded the sun to rise, but created the world's first 2 Inca, Manco Capac and Mama Ocolo, the Adam and Eve of the Andes. While the story is indeed dramatic, it's fair to say that the Incas didn't actually originate on the shores of Lake Titicaca. A more realistic version, note that word, is that in the mid-15th century, the Incas invaded the island, wresting control from the rulers of the time, and created the story in an attempt to not only justify their reign, but to identify themselves with the pre-existing Tiwanaku civilization, whom they considered to be a great source of religious and ideological identity. So I've just come from Tiwanaku, and you can find that video linked up below. I think it's disingenuous to call this, like a modern word would be appropriation, wouldn't it? But I'm not sure that's accurate. I think what it feels like to me that they were doing is not appropriation, it's resonance. And the closest way in for a Western magician to understand this would probably be the pharaoh in, let's just take New Kingdom Egypt, right? The pharaoh, whilst alive, is a resonant expression of Horus, and when dead, a resonant expression of Osiris. Now, if you don't think that the cosmos is alive, or if you don't think this is just fields interacting with each other, which is the materialist way of saying something almost similar, that the cosmos is symphonic, then you miss that, and you seem to somehow have to have the cognitive dissonance that in the case of Egypt, they can be sophisticated enough to undertake building projects that we can't replicate today, but are somehow stupid enough to think that their monarch is the sole expression of Horus, who is also depicted on those buildings we can't build. When you step into a resonant understanding, that all makes sense, and you don't have this idea, and notice, because I underlined or emphasized that, right? A more realistic version is that in the mid-15th century, the Incas invaded the island. Now, they did, right? The Inca Empire was expansionary. But who gets to decide what's realistic? We have defaulted to a falsified cosmology of materialism, which means we actually miss the power of what's going on here. And that was something I experienced during my sunrise ceremony at the Roca Sagrada there in or on Isla del Sol, which is, no, there's something to this. You can't pretend it is almost Soviet level propaganda, like just really basic, really basic subjugate the peasant stuff, because they didn't just incorporate Tiwanaku, which is further, well, about 35 miles north of the lake. They rebuilt it. They actually brought Tiwanaku back into resonance with the living. They brought it from back in time. This is part of that mastery of time into the moment of the Inca Empire. And being able to have the cultural founders be in resonance with the much, much older Andean creation moments. And what that does is actually gives the Inca, which means king, by the way. If you're unaware, we use Inca for the civilization, but it literally means king. So sometimes it can get confusing. You can still call it Inca civilization, that's what we call it, but the Inca was the king, right? When you do that, you are not appropriating, you are assuming responsibility for. You are assuming responsibility for the ongoing management of the balance of the cosmos. Because when it came to energy, the Inca were not fucking around. The kingdom itself, the empire, was called the Tawantinsuyu, which is in reference to the 4 different regions of the empire itself. That's the physical expression. The Tawantinsuyu is almost like, coming back to Egypt, the empire of Ma'at, the empire of the energetic balance between the physical and the invisible. Because the Inca Empire at its heart had the golden temple of the Coricancha. And stretching out from the Coricancha are energetic lines called seques. And it's almost like, think of it like a spider web or a guitar, because these energetic lines would point to sacred instantiations of the imperial landscape called huacas. I actually did my San Pedro ceremony in the Andes, just south of La Paz last week, in relation to one of these huacas called the Devil's Molar. So it's, the words, I almost said, so it's not just components of the physical landscape. Like, I just used the just, like, more realistic. The language will try to draw you back into erroneous materialism, even when you're doing your best to climb out of it. But the Coricancha was the golden heart of this energetic system that connected to these huacas, which were the places of local powerful spirits or gods, different Andean and older entities, apus, mountain spirits, other temples, and so on. This whole thing was a finely tuned web. And again, this is something materialism misses, because it was used communicatively. We think the only way that the Inca communicated was with their amazing like running twinks, right? Spread out across the empire because they didn't have horses. That was pretty cool. The energetic balance was monitored and kept from Coricancha. These guys weren't fucking around. Now, was the Roca Sagrado on Isla del Sol one of the huacas? I actually don't know. It might have been a more special or more sacred object. I'm quite sure it was in some kind of energetic resonance with Cusco, which means navel. That's how much the expression of the Inca Empire was put in service of the energetic, and I would even say temporal balance of the cosmos. So the Inca at Isla del Sol stepped into a much older expression of the understanding of the sanctity and relation of the cosmos, in this case, the birthplace of Taitainti, Father Sun. Now, that is a way of stepping into responsibility, assuming responsibility for multidimensional balance and harmony, which isn't to say the Inca, which is the kings, were all sweetness and light. When were kings ever sweetness and light? And in fact, one of the best books I read last year, and I say read because it was the audiobook version, is Inca Apocalypse. And I highly recommend it. It's actually going to be part of the recommended reading for the Blended Cycle Model course, which we're doing in the second half of the year, because it adopts the conceit, which only partially works, of explaining the different apocalypses that were going on in the Inca civilization during Spanish conquest and back in Spain at the time. There is some very interesting overlap there. But what really struck me was that the arrival of the Spanish was almost an opportunistic infection, because this is sort of the case with Mexico as well. When you think, how did 200 illiterate inbreds from Spain collapse the greatest empire the Western Hemisphere has ever seen? I'm glad you asked. And this book goes into tremendous detail. But at the time, there were two brothers, Atahualpa and Huascar, who were feuding to become the next Sapa Inca. And Atahualpa was, it's almost like, Jordan Peterson alert, it's almost like the Lion King, Scar and whatever Scar's, but I don't remember Scar, Jeremy Irons. Mufasa, I'm going to guess. Not a pedophile. Don't watch that many Disney movies. But it's that archetypal energy. Atahualpa is the warrior, and he's up in Quito in the north of the Andes with all these generals expanding the empire. Huascar is back in the high Catholic capital that is Cusco, and he's the one who knows all the ceremonies and keeps the bloodline familial relationships and has the rituals that continue that are necessary for the functioning of the cosmos in the various temples around Cusco. So there's a tension, a archetypal tension in how one governs an empire, militarily or ceremonially. We saw a similar thing with the split of the Holy Roman Empire into East and West, right? There was that same kind of tension where those who stayed in Rome were kind of on the Huasca team of things, where it's like, this is Rome, this is where everything happens. Anyway, it was not just the looming civil war, it was a plague, and this is one for my terrain theorist friends. A plague had already arrived in the kingdom, or the empire, prior to the arrival of the Spanish. So that's two things going on. And same thing happened in Mexico. Because the Inca was so expansionist, there were any number of tribes on the edges of the empire that were willing to help the Spanish in taking them down a peg. So this is why I think the book is so useful in understanding prophecy and time and how things end in their time, which is, I'm not letting the Spanish off the hook by any means here, but had the Spanish showed up at any other point without all these other things happening, the empire would not have collapsed. So it was collapse time. And that understanding that the cosmos will go through cycles is a deep and profound Andean revelation that is, I would say, retained in Tiwanaku. Check the video out below. It's retained in Andean curing traditions to this day, including the one that I'm lineaged in. And in fact, Alberto Violda's Quero mentor said of the conquest that even it will be put to the further good use or the further improvement or flourishing of the cosmos, so that even though we go through cyclical collapses, it is all almost like heartbeats of the cosmos breathing in the correct direction. That can be seemingly ineffective medicine when we go through one of those moments, which we are now. But this is the wisdom of a cosmovision that has been through many of them, right? And it's called the Pachacuti, but that's a topic for another video. So there is this epochal sense that it was just time. And that is one of the things that comes with assuming responsibility for energetic and temporal management. This is something I believe you were called to do in your own life. Probably don't need to run a totalitarian empire across the Andes. You can probably just seek to make the world a little bit better and a little bit more related where you are. But the medicine is fractal, right? It works for an empire, it works for a cosmos, it works for you. And so returning to the Roca Sagrada itself, this is the birthplace of the sun, and depending on the version where Mama Oklo and Manco Capac came out, either of the rock or the lake, it feels like it was at the rock. It feels like that's the thing that you would step into resonance with very specifically, the birthplace of light across the cosmos, right? Like that's good magic. During ceremony, and this is the other side of the failure of history, where we land this particular plane, there are things that only occur to you in ceremony because you are in relation with other beings. Now, history itself is a form of ceremony, but it's a form of ceremony like history making and history doing. But it tends to only have one kind of outcomes, right? It's a form of ceremony that has a predictable cosmovision at the end that struggles to let new information in. I know that sounds weird because you can dig up something new, but you dug something up out of the ground. Let me give you a different example. Let me give you my example. In ceremony, the Roca Sagrada itself showed itself as the same thing in about 6 or 7 different dimensions. So it was like a fold point, a physical fold point into different dimensions or realities. It showed itself to be the same thing in about 6 or 7 different dimensions. So it was a rock, or is a rock here. And I say rock as an animist. This is a person, this is a being. And it felt like it was a fold point between it. I could only see 6 or 7 different dimensions. It was like it was a rock in all of them, almost like if you had, almost like a paperweight that you'd taken a blurry picture of. So it was a fold point. you could feel it. I described in the video earlier, as you came up to the rock, you can feel the energetic difference in the area, which happened. I've been to a bunch of natural sacred sites, Uluru, Gulaga, most recently, linked that one up below. And it didn't feel the same, obviously, because it was different, but it had that sense of like, oh, you're in the presence of a non-human being that's doing very important work. And it showed me that that was a thing, or is a thing, that you can't find with history. You have to do it with ceremony. In my healing tradition, Alberto Villoldo teaches that brain change, permanent brain change, only occurs in ceremony, only occurs in a state, in a performed state of different consciousness or cognition. And that's one of the things that emerged. There's more, which I'll say in a premium member video, because it's not for YouTube, to do with what went on during that ceremony. But in terms of an insight into what this rock, the Roca Sagrada, the birthplace of the sun, is and how and why, it showed itself to be the same thing in multiple dimensions, which means it can be a place of emanatory update, which is what I believe it to be. And I have a reasonable amount of experience in doing this now, but I believe anyone can do it. I actually think humans, I used to call them homo ritualists, right? I actually think ceremony is one of the things we are called to and obliged to do in the cosmos, which means you have the capacity to drop into Aboriginal English, learn from country. You have that same capacity to be in relation that is teaching. You don't have to come to Isla del Sol, although I do recommend it. It is lovely. You can be in relation where you are and learn from where you are. And in fact, if you're interested, one of the courses you get as part of the $12 a month membership, where you get access to everything, is a magical geography course. And the core magical tech in that is that speaking to country, listening to country, more importantly, the intelligence of the heart. So if it's something that you feel called to do, you can grab that in advance of, if you'd like to join us, the blended cycle model course, where we go into tremendous detail of folding in this kind of experience of engagement with an assumption of responsibility for time, and the use of ceremony to be, as the shamans of the Andes would say, outside of time, looking back in and making changes from within. This is what we have coming up, and this is one of the things that I came to Isla del Sol and Lake Titicaca to learn. So if you're interested, sign up below, and if not, please, please, please do share this video with someone you think would get a kick out of it. See you in the next one.